Hello Rebels, welcome back to Rebel Base. Today's video will be part 5 of What If Yoda Trained Maul. I hope you all enjoy the video and leave a like if you do. Maul thought about what Kenobi had said. He didn't know how he could have prevented what happened so long ago. He didn't have the time to worry about that. He told Anakin to escape and now he had to deal with Kenobi. Maul pulled out his saber and a lavender glow lit up Kenobi's face. Maul could see how hurt Kenobi was. He had a look in his eyes that told Maul he felt extreme pain and betrayal at what had happened. Suddenly, a blue light accompanied the purple hue that lit up the night sky. Kenobi raised his hands slowly into his sparring stance. Maul raised his saber and brought it into a defensive position across his chest. Maul didn't want to fight Kenobi. He only hoped to stall long enough so that Anakin could get away. Once Anakin was out of the way and safe, Maul could then try and get away himself. Maul kept staring at Kenobi. He was wondering what goal Kenobi would be trying to accomplish. Maul carefully weighed all of his options in his head. He thought about all of the outcomes of what was about to happen. Maul calculated that about 30% of the outcomes ended with Maul getting away. Maul knew how Kenobi fought and what he would do during battle. Maul was trained by Yoda and thanks to that knew about Kenobi's strength. Kenobi wasn't very strong or spectacular in the Force, but he excelled in defense. He could often turn his defense into offense and use it against his enemy. This is what had Maul worried about fighting Kenobi. Maul wouldn't have worried about this 7 years ago when they set out on this journey. However, it had been 5 years since he saw Kenobi fight, and this worried him. He didn't know how Kenobi could have changed his fighting style in the last 5 years. One thing was sure though, he couldn't let this fight last long enough for Kenobi to turn the tide against him. Maul didn't know how long Kenobi would let the tension build, for he was certain that Kenobi would not attack first. Suddenly Maul saw Kenobi's brow twitch and turn his foot from relaxed to a position that was ready to spring into action. Kenobi lunged at Maul. He came at Maul so quick that Maul hardly had the time to block what was coming at him. Kenobi jumped at Maul and brought his blade in an arcing attack over his head at Maul. Bringing his saber up towards his face and slightly above his head, Maul parried the attack. Maul force-pushed Kenobi away and sent him skidding to a halt about 25 feet away from him. Now they were looking at each other, waiting for the next move. The only sound to be heard was the dirt shuffling by in the breeze. Maul quickly scanned his surroundings. They were in a clearing with a river that bordered a forest to his back. In the north, there was a small hill that led to a cliff that was about 300 yards away. His options were slim. He had to get some cover and buy more time to form a plan. He could try and retreat to better cover in the forest, which was only 100 yards away. Still, there wasn't a guarantee that he could make it fully intact with Kenobi on his heels. His last two options didn't provide much hope, but one was better than the other. Maul could press the attack towards the cliff, hoping to catch Kenobi off guard enough to beat him. The other option was to hold his guard for as long as he could, hoping that Anakin would return to aid him. Maul didn't see that last as an option, given the fact that he told Anakin to get out of there. Still, he wasn't one for following orders. There was only one viable option left for Maul. He had only hoped that Kenobi disliked the idea as much as he did. "Don't try it," barked Kenobi. "I have no choice," answered Maul. Just like that, Maul made the decision to attack and drive Kenobi away as far as he could. All he had to do was attack as hard as he could in hopes to make ground towards the cliff. Maul began to sprint at Kenobi. Kenobi, in response to seeing Maul come racing towards him at full speed, began to hurl boulders through the force. Maul cut down the boulders left and right, slowing his pace to a jog. It wasn't enough to stop his attack. In one final push, Maul lunged at Kenobi, again unleashing a barrage of attacks upon him. Kenobi parried left, right, down, left, right, up, left, down, right, and up again. Kenobi was barely breaking a sweat. After all, this is where he excelled in combat. But Maul's plan was working as he began to drive Kenobi backwards one step at a time. Maul kept up the relentless attack with hopes to wear him down. They were now 200 yards from the cliff. Maul's goal was in sight, and just as he was about to increase the intensity, Kenobi caught on and pushed Maul back using the force. Maul came to a sliding stop upon his back about 15 yards down the hill. Maul sat up on his shoulders in the dirt. He saw Kenobi advancing. He did a kick-up, landing on his feet. Maul could feel his energy beginning to drain with that maneuver. Kenobi, who was still coming towards him, barely looked to be breathing heavy. Maul readied himself to go on the defensive to catch some needed rest. Suddenly, a 7-foot-sized piece of trunk came whizzing past Maul's head. It came so close to him that he could feel the wind on his ear as it passed by. Maul watched it head towards Kenobi. Kenobi caught the trunk in midair using the Force and dropped it to his left, 6 feet away. "Master!" yelled Anakin in the distance. Maul recognized the voice, but he hoped that it wasn't Anakin. He hoped that this time, and this time alone, was the time that Anakin followed orders. Maul spun around on his heels to find Anakin standing on a halved tree about 25 feet in the air. The look on Anakin's face gave the impression that he knew he was late to the party, but that he was there to rescue Maul. Maul watched as Anakin descended the tree, crossed the river, and met up with him on the other side. Maul quickly questioned Anakin as to why he was there. He also stated that he told Anakin to leave and that he needed to follow orders. "I know, Master, but I couldn't let you have all the fun," remarked Anakin. Whatever the case, Maul was glad to see Anakin. Even though he would never admit it to himself, he did need Anakin's help to drive Kenobi back. The distraction that Anakin provided gave Maul enough time to catch his breath for another round. He knew that Kenobi had gotten stronger, but he didn't know how strong he actually was till now. Kenobi could rival Master Windu and maybe even Yoda. They were the only two to push Maul as hard as he was being pushed right now. Maul wiped his brow, adjusted his shoulders, shook out his arms, and readied his saber. He glanced over to Anakin, who was now standing next to him. They had trained long and hard for a moment like this, only they had hoped that the first time they would have to use what they learned would be when they met Dooku for the second time. They weren't happy with how they had to fight against Kenobi, but it didn't matter anymore. He stood in their way of safety, resolution, and retribution for what had happened those few years ago. Anakin returned the look as if to say that he understood what they had to do. They had to attack as quickly as they could and for as long as it took to knock Kenobi down or force him to retreat. The two of them took off like runners from the starting block. They met Kenobi just over 200 yards from the cliff. They began to unleash all of the attacks they could muster upon him. They slashed at Kenobi to his left and right. They began to flip over one another while attacking Kenobi in an attempt to overwhelm him. Kenobi, in his best attempt to defend the attacks, found himself blocking in a half circle from left to right, but still being driven back towards the cliff. They were now 50 yards from the edge. Kenobi, noticing that the edge was coming closer, glanced back briefly to gauge the distance. Maul noticed Kenobi glance back and knew this was their chance to end the fight. He looked towards Anakin, who was already looking back. Maul motioned what they needed to do. Together they both summoned all of their strength and force-pushed Kenobi. The force was so strong that it sent Kenobi flying back, toppling end over end towards the cliff. Kenobi was now 10 feet from the cliff and still flying backwards. Just as he was about to sail over the cliff, he ignited his saber, catching the last few feet before the edge. It slowed him down, but wasn't enough to keep him from going over. All that was left was a red-hot line in the earth where Kenobi's saber had struck and stabbed the ground. Maul and Anakin ran up to the cliff edge to see what was left of Kenobi. They watched as Kenobi was now a third of the way down the mountainside, with his saber slowing his descent. Maul was finally able to catch his breath. He didn't want to fight Kenobi, but he was glad that Anakin was there. This proved to be a good test for them as they prepared to face Dooku again. The two of them made their way back to the ship in silence. Just as they crossed over the river and entered into the forest, Anakin broke the silence. He began to ask Maul what they could have done differently, so that it didn't have to be this way. Maul thought the same thing himself. It was 5 years ago when the three of them confronted Dooku for the first time. They had been preparing for 2 long, grueling years to get ready. Kenobi had been growing a little impatient as he thought that they were ready. Maul, on the other hand, knew that Anakin needed more time. Maul was able to convince Kenobi to give Anakin more time to grow. Kenobi had agreed, but still left on his own to go face Dooku. He left in the dead of night, and by the time Maul found out, it was morning. In somewhat of a panic, he woke Anakin and relayed what had happened. They came to the decision that they must go after Kenobi and help him. They arrived on Sereno at Dooku's palace, hoping that they weren't too late to help Kenobi. They found the ship that Kenobi had used, and it was still warm. They rushed inside only to be greeted by the sounds of lightsabers clashing against one another. They entered the Great Hall to find Kenobi fighting Dooku one-on-one. Entering the room created the distraction that Dooku needed. Kenobi took his eyes off Dooku for a split second to look over at Maul and Anakin. Dooku capitalized on this mistake and took advantage of the situation. He slashed at Kenobi, catching him at the knee, severing his left leg, and then slashed at his midsection as he did to Qui-Gon. Dooku then threw Kenobi against the wall, letting his body hit with a hard thump and fall to the floor, seemingly lifeless. Anakin roared out in anger to see his friend lying on the ground, dismembered and lifeless. He rushed in with all his anger, only to get zapped by Dooku's lightning and get sent flying back, landing at Maul's feet. Maul stared at Dooku, who was daring him to try and attack. Maul knew that he had to do right by Anakin and protect him at all costs. He picked Anakin up off the cold stone floor and rushed back to their ship so they could escape while they were still able. Maul was back in the forest with Anakin again. Perhaps if he had done a better job at preparing Anakin, it would have ended different. Anakin, sensing Maul's thoughts, mentioned that he was grateful for what he did those years ago and that it wasn't his fault. "We thought he was dead," marked Anakin. "You did nothing wrong." "Still, we could have gone back for him, fought with him, or we could have gone with him in the first place," Maul answered. "We couldn't have known. You did what you had to." "Look what that got us," replied Maul. "Dooku was strong and turned Obi-Wan against us. We will get him back and defeat Dooku together." Maul was grateful for Anakin's decisiveness. He was right after all. They would bring Kenobi back to the light if it was the last thing they did. Thank you all so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Check out this video about what if Palpatine had found Anakin in The Phantom Menace. I hope you all have a great day, and may the Force be with you, always.